There is a specific kind of pain that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with thunder or the dramatic collapse you might expect from something that is in the process of ending you. It arrives quietly. In the small hours when the bed beside you is cold and the man who set your entire soul on fire is somewhere else, with someone else, and you are lying in the dark wondering how something that felt so much like being chosen could leave you feeling so completely abandoned. My name is Lily Voss. I am 22 years old. I am the lowest thing in the world of wolves, an omega, and bonded, half-blood, the daughter of a man who looked at me one morning and saw not a daughter, but a debt he could finally settle. And I am irrevocably, catastrophically, completely in love with Dorian Ashvale, Alpha King of Velmore, ruler of the Black Spire territories, the most powerful and the most dangerous wolf in 4 kingdoms. A man I was never meant to touch. A man whose touch I cannot survive without. What we had was the kind of love that leaves marks on the skin, on the soul, on the specific architecture of who you are after it has moved through you. It was forbidden and exhilarating and toxic in the ways that only the most real things can be toxic, not because it was small, but because it was enormous and neither of us knew, at the beginning, how to hold something that large without damaging it. I am going to tell you all of it. Every burning, breathless, devastating word. And then he is going to tell you his side. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you are already hooked in on today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We like to know our pack members from all over the world. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. I was 17 years old the first time I saw him, and I understood, in the immediate visceral way of someone being struck by lightning, that I was in serious trouble. My father had dressed me carefully that morning. Not out of love, I want to be clear about that from the beginning, because the truth matters even when it hurts. He dressed me the way a man polishes something he intends to sell. My dark hair pinned back with the silver combs that had been my mother's before she died. A dress the color of deep water, the only fine thing I owned, that he had appeared with 3 days prior and told me to keep clean. I had asked what the occasion was. He had told me to be ready by mid-morning and not to speak unless spoken to. I understood then. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. My father had the expression he wore when he had resolved a problem at someone else's expense, and I had long since understood that in his accounting, I was the most expendable resource he possessed. The Velmore delegation arrived at our pack's main hall at the 10th hour. There were 12 of them, soldiers and advisors in the black and silver of the Black Spire court, moving with the coordinated precision of wolves who answered to someone accustomed to being obeyed. They filed into the hall and arranged themselves in the specific formation of people who are performing power on behalf of someone else. And then he walked in. Dorian Ashvale did not perform power. He simply had it, wore it the way some people wear their own skin, completely and without effort, as if it had never occurred to him to be anything other than what he was. He was taller than I had expected, broader, dark-haired, with the kind of face that made you want to look and then made you feel exposed for looking. His eyes swept the room with a rapid, comprehensive assessment of a man who measured everything and forgot nothing. They landed on me. I felt it like a physical contact. His gaze finding mine across the hall, holding for exactly 2 seconds longer than a survey required, and in those 2 seconds something happened in my chest that I had no framework to understand. My wolf surged. My breath left. Every nerve ending I possessed pointed at him simultaneously like a compass array finding north, and the world reorganized itself around a new center of gravity that had not existed 30 seconds prior. The mate bond. I had heard of it. Every wolf had. But I had heard of it the way you hear of things that happen to other people in other lives, remarkable and distant, and not for someone like me. It was happening to someone like me. Right now. In my father's hall. He shuddered, his expression so rapidly I almost missed what had crossed it. Almost. He looked away. Continued his survey. Sat at the chair my father had placed at the hall's head. My father stood and began speaking in the careful, deferential tone he reserved for people he needed things from. I caught fragments: territory access, trade renegotiation, the outstanding debt accumulating since the failed harvest. And then the part one had known was coming without knowing its exact shape. Me. At the end of 40 minutes of negotiation, my father announced that his daughter Lily would be accompanying the Velmore delegation. As settlement. As ward. As whatever word made the transaction palatable. I was 17 years old and I was being handed to a king to pay my father's debts. I stood. I picked up the small bag I had prepared, 3 days of clothing, the silver combs, my mother's book. I walked toward the delegation. And as I passed Dorian's chair, close enough that his scent reached me, dark forest and cold iron, and something warm underneath both, he said quietly, "You don't have to be afraid." I stopped. Looked at him. His expression was controlled and careful, but his eyes, those gold-brown eyes, were doing something else entirely. "I'm not afraid," I said. Which was almost true. I was terrified. But underneath the terror, burning through it like something that refused to be extinguished, was something I had no framework for at 17. Want. Immediate. Complete. The kind that occupied the body before the mind had any say in the matter. I wanted his hands on me. I wanted to know what his voice sounded like without the control in it. I wanted to know what lived underneath the cold iron in his scent. I was being sold to this man, and I wanted him with an intensity that had no appropriate outlet and no rational defense, and I knew it and could not stop it. I walked out of my father's hall and did not look back. In the carriage that carried me away from everything I had ever known, I pressed my palm to the window and watched Dorian ride alongside, his profile sharp against the gray sky. I told myself what I was feeling was simply the bond. Simply biology. I told myself it would fade. It did not fade. Not for a single day of the 5 years that followed. Chapter 2. Blackspire Keep was the most beautiful prison I had ever seen. I say prison not with bitterness, not yet, but with accuracy. I was given rooms in the eastern wing that were generous and entirely separate from everywhere that mattered. Handmaidens who were polite in the careful way of people following instruction rather than feeling it. Access to the library, the lower gardens, the east courtyard. Access to everything decorative and nothing real. For the first 9 weeks, I barely saw Dorian. The bond made this an exquisite torture. I could feel him in the keep constantly, his location, his mood transmitting in fragments through the thread between us. When he was in his study 3 floors above my rooms, I felt the quality of his concentration like weather. When he retired at night and the keep went quiet, I lay in my bed and felt him, closer than he had been all day, just floors above me, and the bond in the dark of the keep was a living thing, breathing and warm and desperately insufficient. I thought about him constantly. There was nothing else to do with the feeling, nowhere for it to go, no outlet, no acknowledgement. So it lived inside me and grew larger in the absence of anywhere to put it. I thought about his hands. Those specific, capable hands, large and certain, and I spent an embarrassing amount of time imagining them, what they would feel like against my face, against my waist, against every place that had never been touched and was making itself known to me in the dark with considerable insistence. I was 17 and then 18, and I wanted him with a desperation that was becoming architectural. It was building something inside me that had no door. The first time we were alone together was the 9th week. He came to the library. I was deep in a territorial history when the bond shifted, that specific pressure change of proximity, and the door opened. He stopped when he saw me. I looked up. He was in plain clothes. No court regalia. The simplicity of it made him look younger and more dangerous for being approachable. "I didn't know you came here," he said. "Every morning," I said. He looked at the book. "Territorial History of the Eastern Reach. You're reading the contested border sections. The annotations disagree with the main text fairly consistently." "That was my grandfather," he said. Something unguarded moving across his face. He had strong opinions about the East Fin settlements. "He was wrong about the trade routes," I said. "The main text has the better argument." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he sat in the chair closest to mine. Not across the room. Right beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him and smell that dark forest and iron scent that had been living in my memory for 9 weeks. "Show me," he said. We spent 3 hours in that library. He argued and I argued back, and he was wrong twice, and the specific grace with which he acknowledged it made something dangerous happen in my chest. He was funny, quietly, drilly, in the spaces between sentences. He listened to what I said with his full attention in a way that made me feel, for the first time since arriving at Black Spire, like a person rather than an arrangement. When the morning bell rang and he stood to leave, I felt his departure as a physical subtraction. He paused at the door. "Lily," my name in his voice. The first time. It landed differently than I expected, not formal, not distant. Warmer than either. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll be here." He came back the next morning. And the morning after. And every morning for 6 weeks, building something in the space of those hours that had no official name and no acknowledged existence and was, despite both those things, the most real thing in my life. Then he kissed me on the 43rd morning and everything became simultaneously better and much, much more complicated. I had reached past him for a volume on the high shelf, turned back to find him closer than I registered, and he was there, looking at me with that look that had been building for 42 mornings. "You should know something," he said. Voice low. Library empty. "Tell me," I said. "I have been trying very hard," he said carefully, "to be appropriate about this." "So have I said. "It is not working." "No," I agreed. "It is not." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingertips grazed my cheekbone, and I felt it everywhere, a touch so light it barely existed, and my entire nervous system responded like it was the most significant contact of my life. Because in every way that mattered, it was. His hand curved around my jaw. Warm, certain, nothing like I had imagined, and also exactly like I had imagined. His thumb brushed along my lower lip, a question in the stillness, and I felt my breath leave me completely. "This is not allowed," he said. "I know what I am," I said. "I know what this is," he said. "And I cannot unknow it." He kissed me. His lips were warm and unhurried. He kissed me the way someone touches something they've been afraid to want, carefully, reverently, as if I were something that could be damaged, and he had made a decision to not damage me. His hands rose slowly, settling on my shoulders with a gentleness that made my wolf go absolutely still in surprise. His palms spanned the curve of my shoulders toward my collarbones, and he held me there for a moment, simply held, anchoring, before drawing me closer. The bond between us ignited so completely that for a long shining moment there was nothing else. No court. No rank. No impossible distance between what we were supposed to be. Just his mouth on mine and his hands learning the shape of me and the specific sensation of something that had been building for 43 mornings finally arriving. When we separated, we were both breathing like we had been running. He pressed his forehead to mine. Eyes closed. Hands still framing my face. "Lily," he said. "Just my name." The whole sentence. "I know," I whispered. But I didn't. Not fully. Not yet. What I missed, because I did not yet know to look for it, was the knowing better in his eyes before he shuttered it. That knowledge came later. At considerable cost. Chapter 3. For 8 months I lived in 2 worlds. The first world was the official one Black Spire keep with its court and its hierarchies, and its elaborate performance of rank. In this world I was invisible. The ward in the Eastern Wing. The Omega half-blood the court pretended did not exist even when I was standing in the same room. Meals at the lower table. Gatherings I was not invited to. Corridors that went quiet when I entered and loud again when I had passed. The second world was ours. The library mornings. The long walks in the lower gardens after the evening meal. The hours in his study, him working through the business of ruling, me in the chair across from him supposedly reading, actually watching him and thinking things about him that had no appropriate outlet. He would look up and catch me. He would hold my gaze for a moment, the gold-brown eyes warm with something private, and then returned to his work. At night, in the private hours, he came to me. I want to tell you about the first real night. The one that came 3 weeks after the library. Because it changed what I was in my own body, what I understood myself to be capable of feeling. He appeared at my door late, after the keep had gone quiet, and when I stepped back to let him in, he did not reach for me immediately. He stood in the center of my room and looked at me with an expression so unguarded it made me ache. "I keep telling myself not to come," he said. "And yet," I said. "And yet?" He crossed the room slowly, stopping in front of me. He reached up and carefully removed the pins from my hair, one by one, his fingers moving with a patience that made my heart hammer so loudly I was certain he could hear it. He could hear it. He could smell the nervousness, the anticipation. I knew this. And yet he did not rush. When my hair was loose, he spread it through his hands like he was learning the weight of it. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he said. "I won't want you to stop," I said. His hands rose slowly, giving me every chance to move away. When I didn't, his palm settled gently on my shoulders, large and warm against my skin, spanning from the curve of my shoulders toward my collarbone. For a long moment, he simply held me like that. Then his thumbs began tracing small, slow circles against my skin, and I felt myself relax into the touch entirely. He was gentle. That was the thing that undid me. This man who ruled 4 kingdoms with iron precision, whose voice could silence a court with one syllable, who was everything powerful and controlled and unreachable, he was so impossibly gentle with me. His fingers slipped beneath the thin straps of my nightgown. A pause. A question in the stillness. "Yes," I whispered. He slid them down with aching slowness, first one shoulder, his fingertips trailing lightly, then the other, the same careful gentleness. The fabric whispered down my body. His hands remained on my shoulders, neither moving nor retreating, just holding, anchoring. I reached for him with trembling hands. Found the edge of his shirt. My fingers fumbled with the buttons, clumsy with nervousness and want. His skin was warm and smooth, stretched over solid muscle that shifted beneath my palms as I explored the breadth of his shoulders, the firm planes of his chest. When my hand settled over his heart, I felt it beating fast and strong, faster than his controlled demeanor suggested, and something in me steadied at that. He was as undone by this as I was. I grew bolder. My fingers traced the ridges of his stomach, the dip of his waist. His muscles tensed beneath my touch, and I heard his breathing change, becoming less controlled. When his lips found my neck, I made a sound that surprised me, breathy and wanting, nothing I recognized as mine. His mouth worked slowly, kissing, his teeth grazing with the lightest touch that sent electricity through every nerve I possessed. His hands explored with increasing confidence, learning the curve of my ribs, the dip of my waist, the flare of my hips. When his palm pressed against the small of my back, pulling me closer, the warmth building between us became something else entirely, something that had a name I was only just learning. Afterward, we lay tangled together, both trembling. His arm wrapped around me, holding me close. For a long time, neither of us moved, just breathed in the darkness together, hearts racing. "This is real," I said. Not a question. His arm tightened. "It is real," he said. What I did not know then, what I would not discover for another 3 months, was that somewhere else in Blackspire Keep, another woman had been waiting for him. And had been waiting far longer than I had been there. The real world was about to introduce itself. With devastating precision. Chapter 4. Her name was Selah Vorn. She arrived on a diplomatic visit from the Northern Reach, which was the official explanation, and she was everything I was not, which was the truth underneath it. Pure blood. High-ranked. The daughter of one of the most powerful pack lords in the Northern Territories, carrying the specific confidence of someone who had never once been made to feel she did not belong in any room she entered. She was beautiful. Copper gold hair and pale northern skin, and a way of moving through space that made everyone around her seem like they were standing still. And Dorian looked at her. Not the way he looked at me. The way he looked at Selah was different, comfortable, familiar, the ease of something long established. He greeted her in the main hall with public formality, and I stood at the edge of the gathering where Omega stood, which was always the edge, and I watched his face when she crossed toward him. Fond. That word sat in my chest like a stone. That evening at dinner she sat beside him at the high table. I sat at the lower table and I watched Selah lean toward him to say something and watched him tip his head to listen with the ease of habit, and the stone grew heavier and heavier and I ate nothing. He did not look for me across the room once. He always looked for me. In every gathering, no matter how careful he was publicly, his eyes had always found mine. A small thread of connection that said, "I know you are here." That night he did not look. I went back to my rooms and I told myself I was being foolish. That the diplomatic visit required his attention. That Selah's presence changed nothing. I told myself this with great conviction. I did not believe it. He came to me late that night. Later than usual. When I opened the door his expression was closed, the armor fully in place, and when he reached for me I stepped back. "Who is she?" I asked. He was still for a moment. Then, "Selah is, we have known each other a long time. Her father and mine had agreements." "Is she your mistress?" For seconds of silence. For seconds that changed the shape of my life. "It is complicated," he said. I turned away from him. Went to the window. Pressed my palm against cold glass. "How long?" I asked. "Before you," he said. "Years before you." He crossed the room to me, stopped behind me. I felt the warmth of his proximity, my wolf straining toward him despite everything. What she and I have is political as much as anything. The Northern Alliance requires. "Don't tell me about the alliance," I said. "Tell me what you want." "Not what the council expects." "What do you want?" "Silence." "You," he said. The single word stripped of everything else. Just the one word, raw and real, and I believed him. That was the worst part. I believed him completely. "And her," I said. He didn't answer. I turned to face him. He looked at me across the cold room with the expression of a man who has constructed a situation he cannot exit cleanly and is only now understanding the full damage of it. "I love you," he said. "Whatever else is true, that is true." "I know," I said. "And it is not enough." He came to me anyway that night. And I let him. Because the love was real and the want was real, and I was 18 years old, and I did not yet have the strength to refuse both things simultaneously. He held my face in his hands in the dark and kissed me with the specific tenderness of someone asking for forgiveness, and I pressed my palms against his chest and felt his heartbeat and told myself that a heart that beat this fast for me could not belong to someone else. I was wrong. But God, in the dark, with his hands tracing every part of me like I was something worth memorizing, it was very easy to be wrong. Chapter 5. I stayed for 14 more months. I want you to understand this. Not to judge me, or judge me if you must, but to understand the architecture of it. How a person stays in something they know is hurting them. How the love that is real and the pain that is also real can coexist in the same body and both be completely true simultaneously. I stayed because in the private hours, when the official world slept, Dorian came to me, and what existed between us in those hours was nothing short of extraordinary. He learned me. Every response. Every place where his touch made thought dissolve and left only sensation. He was thorough and unhurried, paying the kind of attention that makes you feel genuinely and completely seen. There were nights when he came to me and the rest of it, Selah, the court, the invisibility, fell away entirely. One night in the deep of winter, he came to me late, after I had almost stopped expecting him. He appeared in my doorway and something in his face was different, raw, undone in some way he had not yet explained. He crossed the room and reached for me, and I let him hold me for a long time before either of us spoke. His hands moved gently over my shoulders, the way they always did at the beginning, slow and warm and asking rather than taking. My heart hammered, and I was certain he could hear it. His breathing was steady, but I could feel the change in him beneath it, the warmth beneath the control, his scent shifting into something rich and deep that made my wolf stir with recognition. He lifted my fingers to his mouth and kissed them one by one, his lips warm and soft against my skin, and the tenderness of it nearly broke me in a way the passion alone never had. "Tell me what you're thinking," I said. "I'm thinking," he said quietly, his lips still against my knuckles, "that I don't deserve to be here." "No," I agreed. "You don't." He looked up at me. "And yet here you are," I said. "And yet here I am." His hand came up to cut my face, his palm warm against my cheek, his thumb brushing over my lower lip. "Because there is nowhere else I want to be." That night was different from the others. Not urgent, but reverent. He moved with a slowness that felt like apology and devotion simultaneously, his hands mapping every part of me with the care of someone who understands they are being trusted with something irreplaceable. When he held me after, both of us trembling in the dark, his arm pulling me close with the specific grip of someone who is afraid to let go, I lay with my cheek against his chest, and I counted his heartbeats, and I told myself it was enough. I told myself that right up until the moment it stopped being enough. That moment came on a Tuesday evening. Dinner. The lower table. Watching Selah reach across the high table to touch Dorian's arm as she made a point, watching him cover her hand with his without thought, the casual unguarded gesture of something long established, and feeling something inside me go very quiet. Not angry. Not devastated. Quiet. The way a fire goes quiet when the last fuel is spent. Then something happened that broke it entirely. 3 days before I left, I was coming down the corridor toward the library when I heard Dorian's voice from inside. The door was ajar. His voice and Selah's, and they were not discussing politics. She was telling him she was with child. I stood in the corridor with my hand against the stone wall and the world tilting on its axis, and I heard him go very still inside the room. Heard him say, quietly, in the voice he used when something had cost him something, that he needed time to think. Time to think. 2 years he had asked me for time. I went back to my rooms. I sat in the window and I looked out at the Greyvale forest, and I understood that the situation I had been living inside had just become something I could not survive. I packed that night. 3 dresses. The silver combs. My mother's book. The small savings accumulated against exactly this contingency. I wrote no note. There were no words adequate. At the 3rd bell, I walked out the servants' gate and into the dark. The bond stretched and screamed as I walked. Every step away from Dorian cost something physical, a genuine ache in the chest that built with distance. By the time I reached the border of Blackspire territory, I was dizzy with it. I kept walking, because somewhere ahead of me was a life with my own name on it. And somewhere behind me was a man who had loved me badly. And the baby that might be his was the thing that I could not unknow, could not carry, could not stay inside and remain myself. I walked until the keep disappeared. I walked until the pain changed from something sharp into something I could put down and pick up at will. I walked toward myself, not knowing that what I was leaving behind me was about to combust.
Chapter 6: The Alpha King's POV. I want to tell you about the morning the library was empty, not as a moment of dawning realization, as the moment my entire interior architecture failed simultaneously. She was gone before I understood she was going. That is the thing I cannot forgive myself. Not that she left, not even that she had reason to, but that I did not feel it coming. The bond should have told me. She should have been impossible to lose without warning. And she was, in the end. The bond screamed at me throughout that last night she was in the keep, pulling with an urgency I attributed to her emotional state after the library corridor and not to what it actually was. A woman saying goodbye through the only language we shared. I went to the library at the 8th hour and found it empty. I stood in the doorway, and the quality of the emptiness told me before my mind caught up. The room was abandoned, not simply unoccupied. Something warm had stopped. I went to her rooms and found the drawers open. Silver combs gone. The book gone. 3 dresses. She had counted what she owned and taken all of it, which meant she had been counting for longer than I wanted to know. What happened inside me in that moment is not something I can fully describe to you. The bond went taut, already stretched to a distance that meant she had been walking for hours, already the sensation of something being torn along its full length. I destroyed the study. Completely. I put my fist through the map table. I swept every document from the desk. I stood in the wreckage of the most controlled room in Blackspire Keep, and I felt what the Alpha King of Velmore was not supposed to feel. Panic. Raw, structural, devastating panic. I went after her before I had finished thinking it through. No guard. No contingent. No plan beyond the bond pulling north and east and the certainty that I would ride until I found her or the road ran out. But first, and this is the part of the timeline that matters, I went to Selah. I did not go gently. I went in the specific state of a man who has just destroyed his study and is still carrying the wreckage of it, and Selah took one look at my face and understood that something had shifted beyond the point of recovery. "She's gone," Selah said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. "And you're going after her?" "Yes." Selah looked at me for a long moment. She was composed. She was always composed. It was one of the things that had made our arrangement functional. But something behind her eyes was complicated, and I did not have the time or the decency to fully acknowledge it. "The child," I said. "The thing you told me." She looked at me very directly. "I am not with child, Dorian." I stared at her. "I said it because I needed to know," she said quietly. "How much she meant to you. Whether you would choose the situation or her." A pause. "I have my answer." I stared at her for a long time. "Selah, go," she said, quietly, without hostility. The specific dignity of a woman who has made a calculation and is living inside the result of it. "I won't wait, and I won't be here when you return." We both knew this arrangement had an end. I simply preferred to choose the moment of mine. I left. I rode out alone that same morning, following the bond north and east, and I want to tell you what those hours were like, what it does to a man to ride through the dark following the thread of someone who is running from him and is right to run, who he has hurt and cannot undo having hurt, who he loves with an enormousness that he has spent 2 years refusing to inhabit fully. Let me go back. Let me tell you how it actually began from my side. I am Dorian Ashvale. I have ruled Velmore since I was 22. I was raised to strategy, to endurance, to the understanding that a king who felt too much was a king who would be exploited. I had built walls that were, by the time I was 27, functionally impenetrable. And then my delegation arrived at a failing pack elders' hall, and a girl in a deep-water dress looked up at me across 30 feet of worn stone floor. The mate bond hit me like a blade between the ribs. Not romantic, violent. Like the ground shifting. Something that had been waiting inside me for years finally locating its reference point and reorganizing everything around it. She was young, Omega-born, the daughter of a man who had challenged my authority. I had just purchased her alongside a debt settlement. I controlled my face. I looked away. But when she passed my chair, I said, "You don't have to be afraid." Not king behavior. The bond speaking through a man who was not yet ready to acknowledge it. And she said, "I'm not afraid." And she was lying, and I knew she was lying. I could feel the terror through the bond, this new and overwhelming presence. But she was standing inside it with her chin level and her mother's silver combs and her dark eyes direct. She was the most remarkable thing I had ever encountered. I put her in the eastern wing because I could not put her anywhere that mattered without explaining why. I told myself I was being careful. Being protective. I was protecting myself. I came to the library on the 43rd morning because I could not construct another reason not to. 42 mornings of discipline. 42 mornings of the bond pulling and me telling myself it would pass and going to work and coming back and the bond still pulling. When I found her arguing with my grandfather's annotations and telling me calmly that he was wrong, something happened that I had not prepared for. Not just want recognition. The specific shock of a man who has been governing 4 territories and meeting the most sophisticated strategic minds of the age and has just found, in the eastern wing of his own keep, someone who thinks faster than any of them and has no idea. She had been told her whole life what she was: low, insufficient, not worth the room she occupied. And inside that, burning away without anywhere to go, was this extraordinary intelligence, this ferocity, this woman who would look a king in the eye across a battered table and tell him his grandfather was wrong. I fell in love with her in 3 hours of arguing about border policy. And then I made every wrong choice available to me for the next 2 years. I kept Selah. I kept Lily secret. I told myself I was managing a complicated situation and I was protecting her from political exposure and I was keeping her safe. I was keeping myself comfortable. I was keeping my political capital intact. I was using her patience like a resource and calling it love. The night she let me kiss her in the library, the night the bond blazed open between us and she gripped the front of my shirt like I was the only solid thing, I walked away from it and went directly back to managing my situation. I came to her room 3 weeks later trembling with the understanding that I was not managing anything. I was drowning in her. I crossed the room and I touched her face with hands that were not steady and I kissed her with everything I had been refusing to feel. And when she reached for me with her clumsy, trusting, entirely unguarded wanting God, there are no words for what it is to be wanted by someone who does not know how to pretend, who reaches for you with everything visible, who makes a sound of surprise at her own pleasure like pleasure itself is new information. She was warm in a way that made the rest of my life seem like a cold room. I held her afterward with her cheek against my chest and counted her heartbeats and told myself I would fix everything tomorrow. I said tomorrow for 2 years. And on the morning the library was empty, tomorrow had arrived. At significant cost. Chapter 7. I tracked her for 3 days before I found her. The bond led me north and east through 2 territories. I slept in fields and ate trail provisions and rode harder than I had ridden since the war. The political emergency I had left behind me, no Alpha King disappearing alone was ever a simple matter. I did not think about. Orin, my head of guard, was managing the keep. The council would be furious. None of it registered as important against the direction of the bond. I found her in a lowland settlement called Crestfall, a half-blood community on the eastern border, the kind of place that existed in every territory's margins and no one's strategic consideration. She was at a small medical post treating a child's fever. Sleeves rolled up. Hair pinned back with a piece of string instead of the silver combs. Competent and calm, speaking to the mother in a low, reassuring voice. I stood in the doorway and looked at her and felt something crack open along a line I had not known existed. She looked like herself. Without the court. Without the constraint. Without me. She sensed me before she saw me, the bond shifting at proximity, and went very still at the examination table before turning around. Her face. No anger. No tears. No throwing herself at me with the relief I had not yet earned. She looked at me the way you look at something you love and have accepted you cannot keep, with sadness and a terrible dignity and not a single ounce of surprise. You shouldn't have come, she said. I know, I said. I couldn't not. That is not the same as it being right. No, it's not. She finished with her patient, waited for them to leave, then turned and looked at me fully. Selah told me, I said, about the child, that it wasn't true. Something moved across her face. Not relief, something more complicated. She lied to test you, Lily said. Yes. And you left anyway, before you knew it was a lie. Yes. She absorbed this. How long did it take you to notice I was gone? The library. Same morning. Pain. Quickly contained. I want to explain, I said. You've had 2 years, she said. I know. I crossed the room toward her, stopped when she raised one hand. Not to stop me, simply to mark the distance she was keeping on purpose. You made me invisible, Dorian, she said. For 2 years. You made me exist only in rooms where no one could see. You told yourself it was protection. It was cowardice, I said, the word coming out flat and true. I was afraid of what it would cost me to acknowledge you publicly, and I made you pay for my fear. She stared at me. I ended things with Selah before I left, I said. That same morning. She knew I was coming after you. The arrangement is over. Completely. I held her gaze. I stood in front of my council 3 days ago and told them about the bond. All of it. Your name. What you are to me. What I have done. I paused. They threatened dethroning proceedings. Lily was very still. I told them to do whatever they felt was necessary. The silence in the medical post was total. You would give up your throne, she said. I would give up considerably more than that to have you look at me the way you used to. She looked at me for a long time. The bond between us, even strained by days of distance and 2 years of damage, was warm and real and desperately present. I could feel her through it, the complexity of it. Love that had not died despite everything. Pain still raw. And underneath both, the terrifying hope of someone who wants to believe something and is afraid of what it will cost if they're wrong again. I crossed the remaining distance between her. She didn't step back. She never stepped back from me. Even now, my hands found her face, both palms cupping her cheeks, tilting her face toward mine. Her skin was warm under my hands. Her eyes searched me, reading my face with the rapid, comprehensive attention she had always had, looking for the truth underneath whatever I was performing. I'm not performing, I said quietly. There is nothing left to perform. She reached up and covered my hands with hers. If you ever make me invisible again, she said. Never, I said. On my life. She searched my face one final time. Then, show me. She meant all of it. Show me in action, in behavior, in the daily accumulation of choices. I understood that. But in that moment, with her hands over mine and the bond blazing at proximity after 3 days of desperate distance, I also showed her the way I always had. I kissed her with every restrained thing I had been carrying for 3 days of riding and longer than that. My hands moved from her face to her shoulders. Slowly, the way she had taught me she needed, the way that said this is not urgency, this is intention. My thumbs traced small circles against her skin and I felt her exhale, felt her relax into the touch the way she always had, this specific surrender that she gave only in private and only to me. I missed you, she said against my mouth, quietly, like it cost her something. I know, I said. I'm sorry. Then, I missed you since the morning I met you. She made a sound against my lips that might have been a laugh and might have been something else entirely. Her hands gripped the front of my shirt. Afterward, in the small room above the medical post that she had been using for 3 days, we lay in the narrow bed with the sounds of Crestfall outside and her cheek against my chest, and I held her with both arms and I felt her heartbeat slow gradually from the pace of the past 3 days. She was trembling slightly. So was I. Thank you, I said into her hair. She pulled back and looked at me. For what? For still being findable, I said. Her eyes filled. She pressed her face back against my chest. I held her, and I made the promises I had been making incorrectly for 2 years. Not in words but in the way I held her, specifically and deliberately, the way that said, I know the weight of you. I am not putting it down. But we were not finished with the hard parts. Not by a long way. Chapter 8. I brought her back to Black Spire through the main gates at midday. On horseback, beside me, in front of the full court. I watched them see her. Watched the recalibration, confusion, recognition, the rapid political calculation of people trying to understand what they were looking at. I dismounted. Went to her side before anyone else reached us. Helped her down from the horse and did not release her hands afterward and turned to face my court. This is Lily Voss, I said, voice carrying across the yard in the register that did not ask for responses. She is my mate. She will be addressed as Luna. Anyone who cannot manage that courtesy can come to me privately and explain why. Complete silence. I looked at Lily. She was looking at the court with her chin level and those dark eyes taking in the full scene with the rapid comprehensive intelligence I had been watching from across rooms for 2 years and was now standing beside. where I should have been from the beginning. She caught me looking. "Stop being satisfied with yourself," she said quietly. "You're approximately 2 years late." 2 years and 43 mornings, I corrected. She looked at me. Then she laughed. Full and real, and the sound of it in the open air of the courtyard with the full court as witness was the most significant sound I had ever heard. The council meeting that afternoon was the most contentious of my reign. They said everything I had anticipated. Tradition, rank, political optics, the impossibility of an Omega-born Luna. I let them speak. Then I said, "Are you finished?" and waited for the room to settle into the understanding that I was not a man negotiating. "The bond is not a political opinion," I said. "This is not a proposal. Lily Voss is my mate. The question before this council is not whether to accept it, but how to move forward productively." I looked at each of them in turn. "Those who would like to initiate dethroning proceedings may do so formally. I will fight them, I will win, and the relationship between myself and the initiating parties will not recover." A pause. "Those who would prefer to discuss how to make this work, I am available immediately." Nobody initiated proceedings. In the weeks that followed, I watched Lily move through Blackspire at full force, and I want you to understand what full force Lily looked like because the court was not remotely prepared for it. She walked into every room like she had always had the right to be there, because she had always had the right to be there and had simply been persuaded otherwise for too long. She argued with council members who had been arguing with me for years and won more often than was comfortable. She remembered everything. Every name, every nuance, every piece of information she had gathered during 2 years of invisible observation. She was extraordinary, but she did not forgive me easily. There were nights when I came to her and she let me in but kept herself at a specific distance. Present and warm, but with a guardedness that I had put there and understood was mine to dismantle through behavior rather than declaration. There were nights when she asked me things and I had to answer truthfully, and the truth was uncomfortable and she held me to it anyway. One night I came to her late after a council session that had been specifically designed to be punishing. I was exhausted in a way that went below the physical, and when she opened the door and looked at my face, she stepped back and let me in without a word. I sat on the edge of her bed and put my face in my hands. She sat beside me, not touching, just present. "Tell me," she said. "They tabled a formal motion today," I said, "proposing that the mate bond be officially recorded as non-cognizable, legally unrecognized, on the basis that Omega-born wolves do not hold standing to enter recognized bonds with Alpha-class royalty." I felt her go very still. "It doesn't have precedent," I said. "I have already consulted the legal archive. It will not pass. But the fact that they tabled it, they want me to understand," she said quietly, "that they will keep coming." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and covered my hand with hers, her fingers intertwining with mine, the warmth of it moving through me like the first thing that had felt real all day. "Let them come," she said. "We have the archive. We have the precedent. We have," she paused. "We have each other. Properly this time." I lifted our joined hands and pressed my lips to her knuckles, one by one, the way I had learned she needed. Slowly, each one a deliberate press, not passionate but devoted. I felt her exhale at the fourth. "I need you to know something," I said against her hand. "Tell me. Every choice I made that hurt you, I understood it was wrong while I was making it. I want to be clear about that. I am not a man who acted out of ignorance. I acted out of fear and selfishness, and I dressed it up in language about protection and political necessity." I looked at her. "You deserved the truth of it, not the dressed-up version." She looked at me for a long time. "I know," she said finally. "I have always known." A pause. "The fact that you are saying it is new." I slept in her room that night for the first time. Not in the sense of the nights we had shared before, not in the private hours. Actually slept. Her head on my chest in the dark. Both of us still. Her breathing slow and mine following it. I lay awake for a long time holding her and thinking about everything I had almost made permanent and did not. In the morning, the council would table another motion. In the morning, there would be another political emergency requiring navigation. But right now, in the specific dark of Lily's room, with her heartbeat under my hand and the bond between us warm and open and the most real thing in my life, right now was enough. I thought it was the hardest part behind us. I was wrong. Chapter 9. For months after Lily came back to Blackspire, Lord Vorn arrived. Selah's father. A large, cold-eyed man whose animosity had been building since I ended his daughter's arrangement and whose political influence extended across 2 territories. He arrived with 12 delegates and a formal grievance and a legal mechanism he had constructed with considerable care. He presented it in the main council chamber in front of my full council. And Lily was in the room. The demand: I would formally release the mate bond and reinstate the arrangement with Selah. In exchange, they would withdraw the grievance and maintain the Northern Alliance. If I refused, a full interterritorial legal process would begin, one that, combined with existing internal council pressure, could legitimately threaten the stability of my reign. I watched Lily absorb this across the council table. Watched the stillness settle over her as she understood what was being asked. And I watched, beneath the stillness, the specific terror of someone who loves you and is waiting to see if you will do it again. Choose the political calculation. Choose the comfortable. Ask her to wait while you manage the situation. Lord Vorn finished speaking. The room waited. I looked at Lily. She held my gaze with the expression I had come to know as her braced expression. Chin level, eyes direct, ready for impact and refusing to show it. I turned to Lord Vorn. No, I said. He blinked. I understand the mechanism, I said. My answer is no. Initiate whatever process you feel is necessary. I will meet it, I will win it, and the reconstruction of the Velmore Northern Reach relationship afterward will cost your territory considerably more than mine. I paused. Or we discuss, right now, appropriate political compensation for the arrangement's conclusion, and everyone leaves this room with something. Lord Vorn looked at me, looked at Lily. The Omega, he said, the word deliberate. You would genuinely risk your reign for. Say her name, I said, quietly. The room went completely still. Her name is Lily, I said. She is the Luna of Velmore. You will use her name or you will not address her at all. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Lily spoke. Lord Vorn. Her voice was perfectly even. I understand your position. Your daughter was treated unjustly, and that is a legitimate grievance I support addressing properly. She paused. What is not legitimate is the legal mechanism you are citing. The bond dissolution clause in the compact you referenced was struck in the 63rd year of the Accord and has not been operative since. Your legal counsel has either missed this or has chosen to obscure it. She looked at him steadily. The Northern Reach's legal archive will confirm this. I suggest you verify before initiating a process that will publicly expose the error. Lord Vorn stared at her. Your mate, he said slowly, is formidable. She always has been, I said. I simply required time to understand it fully. The delegation withdrew. They returned 2 hours later with a revised position. The legal threat was dropped. Compensation discussions for Selah's arrangement were opened. That evening I found Lily at her window. I came up behind her and put my arms around her and she leaned back against me with a sigh that contained everything. The exhaustion of it, the relief, the specific feeling of someone who has been braced for impact and understands now that it has passed. You said no, she said. Yes. Before you knew I had the legal argument. I knew you would have the legal argument, I said. You always have the argument. That is not why I said no. She turned in my arms, looked up at me. Why then? Because there is no version of any room I ever walk into, I said, where I choose something over you. Not the throne, not the alliance, not the council, not any of it. I held her face in my hands. You are what I choose. Every morning that I wake up, every room I walk into, you are the first and only choice. She looked at me for a long time. Then, I believe you, she said. 3 words that contained everything. She kissed me then, the full kind, the kind that meant she had arrived somewhere and was not leaving. My arms tightened around her, and I held her against me with the specific grip of someone who has learned the cost of letting go. But even then, even in that moment, with Lord Vorn defeated and the Council grudgingly stabilizing and the Alliance restructuring on better terms, I felt something through the bond that I did not recognize. Not from Lily. From something coming. I should have paid more attention. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the Northern Reach. Not from Lord Vorn. From Selah. She had left the Northern Reach. Had been traveling for weeks. Was currently in Ashvin, the lowland settlement, staying with a contact from Crestfall. And she was with child. Actually with child. The letter was addressed to me. But somehow, in the specific way of things that were always going to come out, Lily was in my study when it arrived. I watched her read it. I watched her face. And I understood that every hard thing we had survived had been preparation for this. The hardest thing. Chapter 10. I want to tell you what happened next. Not quickly. Not with the clean resolution of a story that is trying to be finished. With the honesty of what actually occurred, because it is the only part that matters. Lily set the letter down on my desk. She did not cry. She looked at me with the expression I had spent the better part of a year learning to read, the one that went very still before it decided what to feel. Tell me the truth, she said. Right now, before you have time to decide how to say it. The child is mine, I said. The timing before I found you in Crestfall. Before I ended the arrangement. She absorbed this. She lied to me, Lily said. In that room at Black Spire. She said there was no child. She did not know, I said. Not then. She discovered afterward. I held her gaze. This is not a thing I did to you deliberately, but it is a thing that I did. Yes, she said. The silence was the longest of my life. A child is not a sin, Lily said finally, her voice careful and precise. A child is innocent. Whatever happened between you and Selah, this child did not choose it. I know, I said. That is not what I'm afraid of. She stood and went to the window, her hands clasped in front of her, her back to me. I'm afraid that you will look at me one day with all of this, with everything we have survived to get here, and you will wonder if the cost was worth it. If the simplicity of what you had with her. Lily, across the room, came up behind her, did not touch her yet, waited. Look at me. She turned. I held her face in my hands the way I had on 1,000 previous occasions and had never done carelessly. Both palms warm against her cheeks, my thumbs tracing her cheekbones with the specific patience she had taught me. I will take responsibility for this child, I said. Fully, completely. That is not a question. I held her gaze. But hear what I am saying. There is no version of taking responsibility that diminishes you. There is no version of this that changes what you are to me. You are not a choice I made once and am maintaining. You are the choice I make every morning, every room, every letter, every lord who arrives at my gates. Her eyes were bright. I need time to think about this, she said. Take what you need, I said. I might be angry for a while. I know. Pause. You are entitled to every moment of it. She looked at me, searching, thorough, the specific attention of someone who has been deceived before and has learned to look carefully and is looking now for the truth underneath whatever is being performed. She found it, because there was nothing being performed. This was all of it. Every complicated, honest thing. A man who had loved her badly for 2 years and had learned to love her correctly and was going to spend the rest of his life making good on that. 3 weeks passed. They were not easy weeks. Lily thought and was sometimes angry and sometimes quiet and sometimes came to find me in the study late and sat in the chair across from me and simply existed in the same room. both of us working in a silence that was complicated and honest and more intimate than most declarations. She went to Ashfin. I did not know this until she came back. She had gone to Selah herself, alone, on a horse she had learned to ride in the months since Crestfall, in the plain traveling clothes she favored over court dress. She had spent half a day with Selah. What they said to each other I do not entirely know. Lily told me some of it later when she was ready. She told me that Selah was frightened and alone and had made choices born of love for a man who had not loved her correctly, which was something Lily understood from the inside. She told me that she had made arrangements, practical ones, financial and residential, the specific competence she brought to everything, for Selah and the child to be housed and supported in a way that did not require proximity to Blackspire but did not leave them without backing. She told me that she had done this not for me, for the child, and for the small, complicated solidarity of two women who had both loved the same man imperfectly and survived it. When she told me all of this, I was so undone by her that I had nothing to say. She held her own face in her hands for a moment. Then she looked at me across the desk. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know. And I love you," she said. "Both of those things are true simultaneously." "I know," I said. "And I am grateful for both." She said yes on a Tuesday morning. I proposed in the library, on one knee, with my grandmother's ring in my hand and my heart in my throat and the full understanding that whatever she decided was what I deserved. She looked at me for a long time. "Your hands are shaking," she said. "You have always made my hands shake," I said. "From the first morning in the library. You are the only thing that has ever done that." She reached out and covered my unsteady hands with her steady ones. "Yes," she said. I put the ring on her finger and pulled her out of the chair and held her in the library where everything had begun. The window light around us, the bond between us fully open and blazing, the most present and honest and whole it had ever been. She pressed her face against my chest and gripped the front of my shirt, and I held her with both arms, and I thought about a girl in a deep water dress who had been sold to settle a debt and had walked across a worn stone floor and looked up at a king and told him she was not afraid. She had been everything from the first moment. The ceremony was small. Just the household. Trusted witnesses. Oren at my side, trying not to be visibly moved and failing. Mira, one of the lowland girls Lily had befriended in her medical post-work, in the front row with flowers that were slightly wilted and enormous dark eyes fixed on the proceedings with fierce attention. Lily wore the silver combs. She stood in front of me in the simple ivory dress she had chosen herself, not the elaborate court gown tradition required, and she held my hands and she looked at me and she said, "I didn't want this life. I didn't choose this keep or this title or this court. I was sold to you by a man who saw me as a debt." She held my gaze. And somewhere between the lower table and the library and the forest and everything that broke and everything that was rebuilt from it, I found that the life I didn't choose had become the life I would choose again. A pause. Not because of the crown. Not because of the territory. Because of you. The man in the library who was wrong about his grandfather's annotations and knew it and said so. Her eyes filled. That is the man I am choosing. My voice was not stable when I spoke. I did not attempt to make it stable. "I will love you publicly and permanently," I said. "In every room, at every table, in front of every lord who arrives with a grievance and every council member who tables a motion and every person who looks at you and fails to understand what they are looking at." I gripped her hands. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are never invisible. I will earn you, every day, specifically, without end." Mira in the front row made a sound of profound satisfaction that was audible to everyone. Lily laughed. The full, unguarded laugh that I had been keeping like something precious for 2 years in private and could now hear in the open, in front of everyone, in the light. I kissed her. And outside the keep's windows, Blackspire was learning the name of its Luna. This fierce, extraordinary, Omega-born woman who had been sold to a king and had turned the transaction into something neither of them could have imagined at the beginning. She was not invisible. She was not the Eastern Wing. She was Lily Voss Ashvale. Luna of Velmore. The woman who had told an alpha king she was not afraid while her heart hammered and her hands shook and the world changed around her in a borrowed dress and her mother's silver combs. She had been right. She had never been afraid. She had simply been waiting, without knowing it, without planning it, for the world to catch up to what she already was. Caught up. Every morning after that, I made sure it stayed caught up. I slid my hand to the small of her back in council sessions when she was thinking and did not know I was watching. I opened every door. I shielded her head from low beams in the old corridors she was always forgetting about, my hand there before she had registered the danger. I stole her out of meetings. Actual meetings, formal council sessions, when the wanting became impossible to manage, taking her hand under the table and raising my eyebrows and watching her try not to smile and fail. The two of us slipping out the side door while Oren pretended very convincingly that nothing was happening. I found her in the library every morning. I always sat in the chair closest to hers. She argued with my grandfather's annotations. I told her she was right. She always was. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the very end. My beautiful story family. If this story moved something in you, if you felt every moment of the lower table and the eastern wing and the library and riding alone through the dark and burning down everything to get her back, hit like, subscribe and drop a comment. Tell me, which moment touched you most? Our pack is everywhere and I am grateful for every single one of you. We will see you in the next story.